Hello, everybody. I hope you're doing well and staying safe out there. My name is Rochelle Frybren, and I am the moderator for today's webinar, Migrating USG FLEX to the Cloud. I would like to bring onto the podium Marcus Holmes, Zyxel's Channel Sales Engineer. Marcus has been part of the Zyxel team for 15 years now. But before we continue, I'd like to point out some housekeeping. During the webinar, you'll see three options at the bottom: raising your hand, a chat field, and a Q&A. If you have any questions, use the Q&A section and not the chat field. So Marcus and I will be moderating these questions and answering them at the end of the webinar. Also, this webinar will be recorded for your future needs. I will now turn this mic to Marcus. Marcus, the stage is now yours.
Thank you, Rochelle. Now, as mentioned, today we're going to be discussing migrating your USG FLEX to the cloud so that you can control your USG FLEX within Nebula. So going over the agenda, first we'll talk about the introduction into the USG FLEX, take a look at the gateway menu, and then finally going over zero-touch provisioning to get the device into Nebula. So starting with the USG FLEX introduction. So why would you want to put the USG FLEX into Nebula? Well, the USG FLEX is similar to the NSG series of firewalls that is controlled inside Nebula. The USG FLEX is our newer series of USG firewalls that's based off of our ATP or similar, which can be used either in standalone mode or in cloud mode. In standalone mode, the USG FLEX is used on premise, and then it is controlled either through remote management via VPN or locally managed when behind the firewall. When you put the device in Nebula, it is controlled by our Nebula Control Center, NCC, similar to our NSGs, our APs, and our switches, giving you a single pane of glass, enabling you to configure and monitor your firewall. The management data that is used by the USG FLEX is encrypted when it's sent to the cloud, and then it operates normally with your client traffic. So all of your client traffic normally will just go through your internet connection or your intranet connection, but all management-related data is encrypted through NCC to the cloud. Now, when it comes to our USG FLEX series, we do have two different SKUs. We have a hardware-only SKU that comes with a trial pack for your 30-day UTM service security and our 30-day Pro Pack. Now, the differences between the Pro Pack and the UTM security pack is that when the device is in standalone mode, it uses the UTM security pack, which includes your application control, your content filtering, and your anti-malware services. However, when you put the device into cloud, not only does it use the UTM security pack, but it'll also use the Pro Pack for the trial. The Pro Pack within the cloud gives you extra features, such as getting reports for longer periods of days in terms of data, because in our base mode, you can only gather up to 1 day worth of logs or 24 hours worth of logs. However, when you put it in Pro Pack, you have access to up to 365 days worth of log retention data. Now, when you get the USG FLEX bundle, the difference here being that you get multiple different bundles that come along with it. So you get the UTM security pack, the Pro Pack, the hospitality pack, which are all in the trial. Plus on top of that, you get 1 year of the UTM security service pack and the 1 year Pro Pack. So that's the difference between the hardware only and the bundle. The hardware only SKU gives you a 30-day trial, whereas the Flex bundle, the full bundle, gives you the 30-day trial plus 1 year of security service pack and Pro Pack. Now, when it comes to the different bundled licenses, you can see the differences between the two and what's added and what's removed. So in the security pack, when you have it in standalone or cloud, you get web filtering, application control, anti-malware, IDP, SecuReporter, and that's basically going to be available on both the standalone and the cloud. When you're using it in standalone, you get only email security along with the other options above. So the email security is only available in standalone mode. Now in cloud-only mode, you get CDR, you get security profile sync, and you get the Nebula Pro Pack. And then again, when it comes to the standalone service, you get the hospitality pack. Now, when it comes to differences between our older NSGs and USG FLEX, you can see the added features that have been added to the USG FLEX. So our older NSGs, which are slowly beginning to be phased out, you'll see that we support less features than the USG FLEX does. And this is the reason behind adding the USG FLEX, because the hardware supports the ability to do more than the NSG, the older NSGs could do. So for instance, you can see the additional port grouping on the USG FLEX versus the NSG, which doesn't have it. Now, what this means, for example, is that on the older NSGs, you were bound to the specific ports that were on the device. So the NSG 100, 200, 300, you were pretty much stuck with whatever the hardware came with. However, on our USG FLEX, when you have the higher versions, you can do additional port grouping and decide which ports will be LANs and which ports will be LAN. Additionally, there's a lot more profiles that you can create on the USG FLEX versus the NSG, specifically looking at content filtering, which is something that I'll go over in a future webinar. So the gateway menu. So once the device is in cloud or in Nebula, you'll see that the menu actually changes. So on the left, you'll see the NSG, it shows up as a security gateway, whereas when you have a USG FLEX in Nebula, it shows up as USG FLEX. Now, with the USG FLEX in NCC, you can switch between your gateway types. So if you had an NSG before the phase 11, the default is going to be your NSG for your security gateway. However, if you create organizations now, it will default to the USG FLEX. The reason between these two is because the layout between the two hardwares are different. So when you have an NSG in your Nebula, the UI is going to be completely different because there's going to be different options compared to the USG FLEX. However, you can switch between the gateway types. When you create a new organization by default now, when you run through the wizard, when you input the serial number and the MAC address for a USG FLEX, it'll automatically recognize that you're putting in a USG FLEX into your Nebula organization. Additionally, if you go to create a new site, you have the option to choose between NSG or the USG FLEX. So if you already have an organization created and you want to create a new site to add a USG FLEX or an NSG, you can change between the gateway types by going to the gateway type and choosing the USG FLEX or NSG from the drop-down list. Also, the gateway type can be changed under the general settings page as well. So if you had previously installed an NSG and you're going to be swapping it out for a USG FLEX, you can go to your general settings for that particular site and then swap the gateway type from NSG to USG FLEX. Now, when you have your particular site set up, you have to choose on your site, or sorry, your model type, because again, it's going to choose between either USG FLEX or the NSG for your UI. So you need to make sure that you enter in the correct USG FLEX model. The reason being is because the USG FLEX 700 is going to have more ports than your USG FLEX 100. So you'll need to make sure that you enter in the correct model number so that the UI matches the hardware type. Now, if the USG Nebula site is using the Flex gateway type and you add it to the site, it'll again automatically select the USG FLEX model. So you just need to make sure that you have the correct model set in your gateway. Otherwise, it'll display a warning message showing you that you put the incorrect type in, and it's going to refer it back or default it back to the default settings. Next, let's talk about zero-touch provisioning. So the reason behind zero-touch provisioning and what it is when going back to the older NSG series, when it came to importing the NSG into Nebula, there was a little bit of an issue. If you had a static IP address, you had to log into the device locally, set up a static IP address on the local device, and then put it in place in your network and then have it dial home to Nebula to get connected. This does cause some issues, so now we've come up with a new way called the zero-touch provisioning. This allows you to import your firewall, get the settings, and get it set up ahead of time so that you can just simply plug the device in and then be set to go with Nebula. So with this particular method, what we do is we set up all the settings within Nebula, It asks you if you want to use a dynamic IP address or static IP address. It takes that information and it creates a file which you can put on a USB, or you can be emailed an activation code. This activation code is then ran from behind the firewall once it's in place to get it set up within Nebula. So in order to set this up, the first thing you'll need to do is go into your USG FLEX in Nebula and register the device. So you'll register it within your organization using the MAC address and serial number. Once it's been added, we're going to go ahead and add it to a specific site. So first step, you add it to your organization or your inventory, and then you add it to a specific site. So you'll click the Add To button, and then you can choose to add it to an existing site. Third, what you'll see is an orange Waiting ZTP button. What you can do here is you click on this option, it'll bring up a menu. From here, you can set up your WAN type. So if you need to do DHCP, or if you need to set up a specific static IP address, you can choose it from the WAN type field. Then after you've chosen your WAN type, or if you're going to be using VLANs, you have an option. You can choose to either install it yourself, or you can have a URL sent to the admin's account email. So if you choose to install it yourself, you'll be given the option to put it on a USB. However, you can also have it sent to your email address assigned to the organization. When you have it sent to your email address, you'll see an email that comes from our Nebula CSO. When you get this email, there's going to be a link. In this link, you can have the option to either copy the link, or you can download it and put it to a USB storage disk. Now, this link is an activation key. It stores all the information. It's encrypted, but it stores all the information in regards to your IP address, if you're doing static IP, or if you have dynamic IP address, or if you're using a VLAN. So you have the choice of using the USB disk storage option or using the link. Once you've gotten the link and once you've gotten the USB flash drive installed, what you'll need to do then is you'll need to get the USG FLEX ready to go. Now, by default, they should be, when you get a device, you want to upgrade the device to the latest firmware regardless. So when you get the device, you'll want to go in, make sure it's on the latest firmware. So you'll go in standalone mode, log into the firmware management in the firewall, and then use the cloud firmware to make sure that it is on version 5.0 or later. Once the firmware has been updated, you'll need to go and reset it back to factory defaults. Now, the reason being is because the ZTP communicates to the USG FLEX using its default admin credentials and admin address. So after you've upgraded the firmware, you need to reset the device by pressing and holding the reset button to reset it back to factory defaults. If you ignore this step or you forget to do this step, the ZTP will not work. It will not be able to communicate directly with the firewall to get everything set up for the Flex to be added into the cloud. So once you set it back to factory default, you have to take your port 2 on the USG FLEX and connect it to your WAN port, your internet source, be it cable modem, DSL modem, or switch. Make sure that it has to be connected on port 2 to your uplink to the internet. Port 4 must be connected to your PC or laptop. Now, if you've copied the link, what you'll do is just basically paste that link into your browser. And then what it'll do is it'll run through the ZTP configuration. So it'll go through the whole activation process once the link is pasted into your browser. So it'll start copying the new WAN settings over to the firewall, and then it will then connect to the internet, to the cloud with NPC, and it will start downloading a specific firmware for the device to be put into the cloud. You're going to see the sys light or the system light alternate between green and amber until the activation is complete. The page that you see where it says Centrally Managed Portal to Unlock Your Business will walk you through each portion of the process, to applying the configuration, to verification, and activation. If the activation is successful, you'll see a pop-up saying that the ZTP process was successful. However, if you do see the ZTP process failed, you'll get the option to retry. And retrying is quite simple. It'll just basically give you the option to redo the whole setup, but you'll need to make sure that, again, the device has been set back to factory defaults before you go through this process. Now, after its device has been switched into cloud mode, you can verify that it is in cloud mode by logging into the local GUI. The local web GUI will show something completely different. It'll just show the basic statistics, and all of the basic menus or the main menus will be exempt because the local web GUI is going to give you very limited information as the device is going to be controlled specifically into the cloud. Now, if you're using the USB storage disk, basically you're going to go through the whole ZTP setup procedure. You're going to copy your file that came to you in your email and put it onto the flash drive. The file itself is going to be a JSON file that contains all of the information to get the device into the cloud. Next, after you have copied the file to the USB disk, you can insert the USB into the USB slot on the firewall. And then at that point, you're going to wait for the sys light to change from alternating green amber to steady green, which means that it has updated the information. The difference here is you're not going to get the same web GUI that shows you the process because you're using the flash disk in order to update the device to be used in Nebula. So you just have to wait until the sys light changes from amber green to a steady green light. Now, if there's any reason why you need to switch back, going from cloud mode to standalone mode, the process is pretty simple. First, you would go into your Nebula organization, and then you go to your inventory, and then you would unregister the device. Once the device has been unregistered, the device will actually continuously dial home, and then it'll see that it's no longer part of a Nebula organization, and then the device will reboot itself and revert back to factory settings in standalone mode. Once this is done, you can actually log into the device itself to verify that it has been downgraded back to standalone mode. Now, what happens if your device was not set back to factory defaults while doing the ZTP upload? Well, basically, it'll just display an error message informing you that you need to reset the device to factory defaults before completing the ZTP process. Now, a couple questions is, what happens if the USG FLEX was reset while in cloud mode? Well, the USG FLEX does not automatically synchronize with NCC. You have to wait for it. To change the USG FLEX back to cloud mode, you have to remove the USG FLEX from Nebula, add the Flex back to the Nebula site, and run the ZTP process again. Now, if you're using the ZTP URL code, be aware that that code is specific to that particular device. So hidden within that URL code has the MAC address of the device that you're trying to register it to. So you can't use the same activation code link on multiple devices. It can only be ran on the device where the URL code was generated for. Now, going through the URL confirmation process, what it does is it tries to apply the configuration. The LAN interface of the ZTP will be set up, and if basically the NCC cannot be applied to the local device, it'll apply the config. Then it will go through the verification process. It'll check if the local device can reach the Nebula control center, and it will check to see if the activation code from the URL is valid. And then once the verification is complete, it will activate and register the device to my Zyxel and NCC. And then finally, if any of the confirmation process fails when using the web browser, it'll give you some specific information. So if the Zero Touch or ZTP activation link failed, you can log back into Nebula and resend the activation link. If the internet connection is down, you can check your internet connection and hit the retry button. If the ZTP activation link times out, one of the things you want to do is check your internet connection and then hit the retry button. Also, if the ZTP activation link fails, you might want to log into Nebula again and just resend the activation link. So there's a number of different processes that you can go through if you run into issues with the ZTP link. And again, if you do have a problem with this or you're running into any roadblocks getting ZTP to work, you can also contact our technical support team who will be able to help you out with resolving any issues that you may be having. And now I'll leave the floor open for any Q&A at this point.
Thanks, Marcus. All right, first question. I saw a license for hospitality. What exactly does that license do?
Okay, so the hospitality license is specific to standalone mode on our USG FLEX. The hospitality license enables you to use the hotspot feature for web authentication for time-based access to your internet. So if you were putting the USG FLEX in a coffee shop, you can set it up so that it requires web authentication using our thermal printer so that the user can just print out a ticket for the patrons to gain access to the internet. So it's specifically for the web authentication portion for the USG FLEX.
Great, all right. Next question. I have an old NSG device. Is it now obsolete? If so, is there a way to upgrade a hardware?
Oh, that's actually a good question. The NSG FLEX is actually slowly being phased out. However, we do have an upgrade program. You can contact your sales rep that can actually help you upgrade your NSG to a USG FLEX based on the model number. So we have a specific upgrade path for going from a specific NSG series to a USG FLEX series. So you want to contact your sales rep in order to get that started.
Great, all right. Next question from Richard. So if you have a running USG FLEX, is there any way to migrate the configuration to the cloud, or do you manually have to rebuild the configuration? Rebuilding will be bad if multiple VPNs.
Yes, understandable, yeah. So right now, there is not a path to migrate an old configuration in standalone mode. That's something that's being worked on for a future release, but as of right now, you'll have to rebuild it. And one of the things that we recommend doing is taking your USG, don't default it, but basically what you can do is you can set up all your configurations in the cloud while the USG is in standalone mode. What you can do is take the device, register the serial number and MAC address, but don't go through the process of doing the ZTP. Once the device is in Nebula with the serial number and MAC address, you can put the USG FLEX on your bench in your workstation and basically go through all your settings and mirror it into the USG FLEX in the Nebula cloud for the configuration. Once the configuration is complete, then you can run the whole ZTP process. It'll default the unit, it'll dial up into the cloud, and then it'll pull down the configuration that you created in the cloud so that once the device boots up for the first time, it'll have that configuration that you've pre-done in Nebula.
Thank you, Marcus. That was very informative. Our next question. When the firewall is in Nebula, what happens to local access?
When the firewall is in Nebula, you have, okay, so when you go through the whole process of adding the the USG FLEX into Nebula, there's not going to be a default configuration. It's going to be basically empty. So your devices will have internet access, but there won't be any policies. And this goes back to the previous question, because what you can do is, let's just say that you're onboarding a new USG FLEX for a client and you want to put them in the cloud. What you can do is you can kind of pre-configure it before it gets to the customer, similar to our USG FLEX, or similar to our our FLEX APs and our FLEX switches, what you can do is pre-configure it before it gets to the customer. So you can take the serial number and the MAC address, import it into the Nebula Control Center for that org and that site, and then you could ship the device to the customer or whenever you're going to install it. While it's in shipment, you can go through the whole configuration panel and start setting up your VLANs or setting up your DHCP and all of your web policies so that when the time comes to flip the switch on and put in a Nebula, once you go through the whole ZTP process, then once it gets connected to the internet, it'll download that configuration file. But coming from a device that's already in standalone mode and you want to just put it directly onto the cloud, the users will lose access to the internet while you're doing that whole process. So we recommend, if you're going to do the switch, to make sure that you're doing it off hours or not when you have mission critical stuff going on in the environment. So you want to do it off hours during maintenance.
Awesome. All right. Now, the last question, is the firewall's HTTPS remote management exposed while in the cloud?
No, it is not. When it's in the cloud, by default, that is shut off. The only way to access the device is locally from behind it. However, there is an option for remote tools and remote management that you can enable if you need to, but we highly recommend leaving that closed off. So you only want to have remote management enabled. Actually, you don't want to have it enabled at all. You just want to have local management, which is enabled by default, because all of your configuration is going to be done by logging into the Nebula Control Center to do your configuration changes.
Great, thanks, Marcus. And I guess that's all the questions.
Okay, perfect. So what I'll do is I'll go ahead and leave my email here on the screen. So if you have any additional questions that you may think of at a later time, feel free to drop me an email. My email is marcush@zyxel.com, and I answer them as they come in. So if you have any questions that you think of later, feel free to shoot me an email.
Great, all right. Thank you everybody for joining our webinar today. That wraps up our webinar, and we will see you on our next webinar. Have a great weekend, guys. Thank you, Marcus. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, Rochelle. All right, bye.